Coming up on Retro Bits. The Sharp X68000, the Japanese Amiga, the God computer. The power to make your dream come true. Says so right there on the side. Here in the West, its name is spoken only in hushed reverence. Few outside Japan have had the privilege of using one. Even fewer will ever own one. The good news is that for the rest of us, all that's needed to experience the best of what the X68000 has to offer is the MiSTer FPGA.
このパソコンならこんなに面白いゲームが楽しめる。ゲームセンターのスーパーゲームからこのマシンのオリジナルゲームまで夢があってますます面白い。
パーソナルワークステーション X68000。夢の続きを語ろうよ。Sharp.
The X68000 was released in 1987 at an initial price of 369,000 yen, the equivalent to $6,000 today. Sold only in Japan, this gaming-oriented powerhouse featured top-of-the-line graphics and sound, along with a unique twin-tower design. The machine utilized a new 10 MHz CMOS variant of the Motorola 68000 processor that was made in partnership with Hitachi. Renowned for its ability to run arcade-perfect game ports, the X68K made use of a custom graphics processing unit, the specification of which placed it at the very apex of home computers of the day. The GPU itself featured a full megabyte of video RAM. That might not sound like a lot today, but to put things in perspective, I was still using a Commodore 64 when this machine came out. It could display a whopping 65,000 colors on screen and had a dedicated hardware sprite controller, allowing for 128 simultaneous sprites with up to 32 per scan line. The custom video hardware also handled scrolling, flipping, multiple bitmap and tilemap planes, and a maximum resolution of 1024 by 1024. In 1988. Stereo sound was provided by the Yamaha YM2151 chip, the same part that could be found in many arcade machines of the day from Atari, SEGA, Konami, Capcom, Data East Namco, and others. It supported 8 channels of FM synthesis and was paired with a separate Oki chip that produced a single channel of PCM digital audio. Around 20 variants were produced through 1993, the later models having faster CPUs, hard drives, more memory, and enhanced graphics. The MiSTer core supports some of these upgraded capabilities, but the fastest 68030 powered models with SCSI and 24-bit color aren't coming to the party, at least for now. The good news is that what we do have available right now covers the most common use cases we care about. Critically, the current price of real X68K hardware places these machines off limits to all but the most die-hard enthusiasts. It's not uncommon to find them selling for $2,000 to $3,000 at auction, often without the matching keyboard, mouse, or most importantly, the multi-sync monitor. Further, overseas shipping increases the cost of risk and damage, and the power supplies are known to self-destruct. So it's awesome that we have the option to experience the system on the MiSTer, and recently the quality of that experience has improved significantly. The last time we tested the X68000 core, it hadn't seen an update in 4 years and barely functioned. We had to look beyond the official version to find community-sourced updates buried deep in threads on various web forums, some in Japanese. But all that changed recently when MiSTer project lead Alexei Melnikov, aka Sorg, Kitrinks, Work, and several others started committing updates to the official repo. All you have to do to get the latest working core now is to run your updater script. Once it completes, you'll have the freshest official release that integrates a slew of fixes and enhancements, including features from Pusan's unofficial core that we tested out in the last News and Updates episode. In addition to the core, you'll need a few other files to get up and running, so head over to the MiSTer GitHub project in the Releases directory. From there, you'll want to grab 3 things: the system's boot ROM, the default SRAM configuration file, and a bootable disk image of the base operating system. With the files in hand, use your preferred method to copy them over to your MiSTer's SD card. Place them all in the Games X68000 directory. You can also copy your floppy disk and virtual hard drive images here, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now you're ready to fire up the core for the first time. If you put the files in the right place, it should come up to this screen. With no disk inserted, the machine starts up kind of like a dumb serial terminal. If you enable modem mode in the core's UART setting, you'll find it connects to DevTTYS1 on the MiSTer's underlying Linux OS. Not particularly useful, but it's kinda neat all the same. What's also cool is that Sharp made the system's BIOS and operating systems public domain, so they're legal to download and use, unlike the Amiga, for example. Let's take a look at the configuration options and what this core currently supports. There's a lot to cover here, so skip to the next chapter if you want to get straight into the games. First up, we have the 2 floppy drives that were standard on all models of X68000. Images have to be in the D88 format, but you will find other types out there. I've placed a link to several conversion tools in the description. One other thing of interest to note, some software will only boot from drive 0 and others only from drive 1, so you will find yourself flipping disks a bunch. Early hard drive equipped models use SASE, the Shugart Associates system interface. Later versions adopted the SCSI standard instead. At this time, the core only supports SASE images in HDF format with a maximum volume size of 30 megabytes. Larger SCSI HDS images are not supported at this time. You may have noticed that there's no place to change the amount of system memory. This is done through custom SRAM configuration files that we'll look at a bit later. Everything else is pretty standard here, including your normal core audio and video settings. There's also a turbo CPU speed option available that I found really helps with long floppy load times. Let's talk about software for a minute. Here, we're in luck, as others have already gone ahead and done the heavy lifting for us. There are entire anthologies of software in both floppy and hard disk formats available for download. The Internet Archive has a pretty complete collection containing games, utilities, and even homebrew. I'm not going to provide links directly to this copyrighted software, but if you search for terms such as MiSTer FPGA Sharp X68000 Starter Pack, Sharp X68000 Collection, or Tauntaun HDF, you'll find what you need pretty quickly. So let's take a look at the base operating system. I created this hard drive image by making a copy of an existing game HDF, formatting it, and copying everything from the bootable D88 image we got from the GitHub page earlier. Human68k, developed by Hudson Soft, is a DOS workalike, so things should immediately look familiar. Commands are in English, and we can already see recognizable startup files such as config.sys and autoexec.bat. One notable difference is that executable files have a .x or .r extension. A built-in BASIC interpreter is included, which is pretty standard stuff for a system of this era. Several pieces of homebrew software I tried were written using this BASIC, so it does have some sound and graphics capabilities. The first X68K system shipped with a megabyte of RAM. Later revisions had more, but all models were expandable up to a maximum of 12. The switch command is like a BIOS setup program that allows you to modify the persistent settings for the system that are stored in a dedicated 16K of memory called the SRAM. The default configuration is provided by the boot3.vhd file we grabbed from GitHub and is set for 7 megabytes. Some software requires more or less RAM to operate correctly, so you may want to have your own custom stored profiles. To do this, simply copy boot3.vhd to another file and give it a .ram extension. In the menu, specify the new file you just created and load it from the SD card. Next, rerun the switch tool and specify the new amount of system memory you want. Accept the changes, then re-enter the MiSTer menu and save your updated SRAM back to the SD card. Now, you can specify and load this alternative profile whenever you need it. We're presently set to 4 megs, so let's try and load a profile for 8 instead. We can verify it worked by loading up the switch program again. Note that whenever you reload the core, it will go back to the default setting. Almost there, guys, just a few more small details to cover. The first is the keyboard. The X68K has a unique layout with some special keys not found on a standard PC. One key in particular is used to toggle the external MIDI modes in certain games. Another is the yen symbol, which is used as a backslash when typing DOS paths. Without them, some operations simply can't be performed. These special keys aren't remappable at the moment, so hopefully that will be addressed in a future update. One more gotcha. The X68000 can output video at both 15 and 31 kHz modes and has its own matching multisync CRT monitor. Some software can even use odd frequencies like 24 or 34 kHz, which may not play nice with your display when using the MiSTer's analog RGB output. You have a couple options here. If you don't want to globally enable the VGA scaler, you can activate it for just this specific core in your mister.ini. Here, I'll set the core to scale to the native resolution of this LCD screen, but you could force it to 240p or whatever works best for you. With that handled, all the weird video modes will be scaled for our display and we're off to the races, or fights, or whatever. It's well established that the X68000's hardware was designed to have similar capabilities to the arcade machines of the day. Capcom even based their famous CPS-1 platform on the design and used the X68K as their development system when creating games like Street Fighter II Championship Edition demonstrated here. There were ports of this game to just about every major home computer and game console of the day, but none were as faithful to the arcade original. After all, the game was developed on this hardware, and it puts to use all of that graphic processing power, with colorful, fully animated backgrounds, parallax scrolling, large detailed sprites, with all the stages, characters, and moves. The game itself runs well enough on the current MiSTer core, but I did run into a few problems. First is that the sampled sound effects start working fine when the game is launched, but within a few seconds of gameplay, they disappear never to be heard from again.
Round 1, fight!
The second is that presently the core only supports 2-button controllers. The real hardware had various add-ons and could even make use of a 6-button Genesis pad with an official Capcom adapter. Dai Makaimura, aka Ghouls and Ghosts, is another arcade-perfect Capcom title on the platform. This one seems to run flawlessly on the core and has no problems that I can discern. Well, except for the one issue, that the game is as brutally hard as ever, and after stage 1, I just want to give up and go back to Battletoads. Like Street Fighter II, Final Fight looks and runs great on the platform and was probably the best home version available at the time. Also like SF2, the PCM audio is glitchy on the current version of the MiSTer core, but it sure does look great. The last Capcom arcade title we'll see today is Strider, and it looks fantastic and plays smoothly. I kinda wish the digital audio was broken in this game because of the protagonist's constant grunting with every slash. Great game, but good grief guys, the grunting gets grating. While the X was a gaming behemoth, it was still a general-purpose computer. In addition to Human68k, a number of other operating environments were available for the platform, one such example being SX Window shown here. Initially released in 1989, it saw several revisions over a 4-year span. Like early versions of Microsoft Windows on the PC, SX Window ran on top of the base operating system. It provided a next step-like GUI and non-preemptive multitasking. SX Window has a number of built-in tools, and as one would expect, it provides file management, document editing, and can be used to launch external applications. For those of us unable to read the kanji, navigating the context menus can be a challenge. Further, all of the applications share the same default race car icon, making it difficult to distinguish one from another. Still, it can be fun trying out everything just to see what's there. As you'd expect of a high-end workstation, the X has a library of productivity applications, sound and graphics editors, and development tools that we'll take a look at later.
ようこそニュープリントショップへ。グリーティングカードです。
Few programs were developed specifically for SX Window, but many can still be launched from it. Sim Earth is a notable exception in the games category, as it requires the environment to run. The main menu and some UI elements in Print Shop are a bit messed up, something I noticed with a handful of other games and productivity apps as well. The application seems to work pretty well otherwise, and it talks, because of course it does. Several other windowing environments are available on the system, but here's a complete standalone operating system. This is OS9 Level 2 from Microware Systems Corporation. Originally for the Motorola 6809, think the Tandy Color Computer or Dragon 32, the OS was later ported to the 68000. OS9 is a real-time, multi-user, multitasking operating system that's more akin to Unix than DOS. I will admit to having no real experience with OS9 to speak of, but it's something I want to look at more in depth when I finally review the Coco 3 someday. I guess I'm not really sure what the use case is here on an audio-visual powerhouse like the X68000. What I am sure of is that the mouse didn't work here, despite being fine everywhere else I tried it. Either I need to set something up in software, or perhaps there's an issue with the core. Anyway, moving on. Capcom wasn't the only company to have arcade-perfect ports on the system, so let's do a little A/B comparison of some SEGA titles next.
Round 1. The time bomb is set.
As you would expect from a high-end workstation, the X68000 was highly expandable. At least 4 different add-on MIDI boards were available, including 2 models from Sharp themselves. As a result, over 80 commercial game titles included support for external MIDI devices such as the Roland MT32 and SC55. There were also music applications, homebrew titles, and visual novels that took advantage of these enhanced capabilities. The latest official core now has support for external MIDI devices as well as the MT32 Pi, which we've covered extensively in past episodes. When connected, a new option will show up in the course menu. Make sure the Use MT32 Pi option is set to Yes and you'll be ready to go. It goes without saying that we'll need to check out Akumajo Dracula because it's just so good on the system and supports a wide variety of external MIDI synths. Some games, such as this one, allow you to choose your MIDI device from a menu. Others require you to hold down a certain key when the game boots up. I'll put a link in the description to a page that documents many of the more unusual corner cases and Easter eggs. Something I noticed right away was the absurd number of shoot-'em-ups for the platform. If you exclude the hundreds of visual novels, maybe half of the available titles are shooters of some kind. There are many unique game mechanics, along with fantastic graphics and music, so if shmups are your thing, you'll have tons of interesting stuff to try out. The best home versions of some of the genre's flag bearers can be found here too, like Gradius and R-Type. I've never really been into this type of game, but it was still fun to explore all the interesting titles and see what gems there were. Another thing that surprised me is the unexpectedly large catalog of software for a machine with such a niche market. Only 150,000 units were sold, and those only in Japan. In the West, the Amiga is often considered the best home computer for gaming of its generation. But as we've seen, the X68000's graphic capabilities exceed that of the Amiga in several key areas. There's no 3D acceleration, but Star Cruiser does a good job of blending 2D and 3D together. The game also switches back and forth between 15 and 31 kHz video modes, but the MiSTer scaler handles it perfectly.
Welcome to the fantasy zone. Get ready.
Of course, the X was a top-shelf system with a premium price tag, about twice the cost of an Amiga 1000, placing it in quite rarefied territory, but no doubt adding to its legendary status. The Neo Geo would come along 3 years later and do the same for home consoles that the X did for the personal computer. But for a time, the system was unrivaled. MiSTer FPGA, or Super Rapid Fire, was developed as Dojin Sofuto, an independent hobbyist project. Sold at Comiket, the lone developer came up with a multiplexing technique that allowed him to quadruple the system's sprite limit from 128 to 512. I wouldn't have even been able to imagine gaming like this in 1987. It would take me another 10 years to own a PC that even approached the X68K's capability. Make no mistake, there are plenty of bona fide AAA titles here, But on the flip side, there are also a lot of mediocre games as well. One collection has over 2,000 disk images, and I must have loaded up hundreds and hundreds just to see what was on them. It's a real mixed bag, but like I said, trying stuff out is half the fun. We've already seen that some software titles have graphics and sound glitches on the core. Here's another example of such an issue. Several other titles I tried simply wouldn't even boot at all. Things have come a long way from where they were just a few months ago, and we have the hard work of the developers to thank for that. Lots of games are fully playable, but just be aware that the core isn't perfect yet and your mileage may vary. Before we wrap up, let's take a quick peek at some non-gaming software. No home computer is complete without a music player, and there are plenty to choose from here. If you fancy making your own music, SoundPro looks like a pretty comprehensive package for creating and customizing instruments with the onboard Yamaha chip. Conveniently, a lot of the interface is in English, but some of the menus are only in Japanese, so if you're like me, you may find yourself breaking out Google Translate. A lot. There are a ton of homebrew titles to explore, and even a handful of demos. In that department, I saw nothing that rivaled what was on the Amiga at the time, despite the hardware advantages. It doesn't sound as if there was a big demo scene in Japan at the time this machine was introduced. I mentioned this before, but there are a ton of art discs and graphic novels. Most of the latter have musical scores and some basic interactivity, even external MIDI in some cases. Fair warning, many such titles are adult-themed. Stay classy, Japan. I think that sums up the current state of the X68000 core on the MiSTer. There's a huge library of software to try out, and many of the titles run perfectly. Some have sound or graphical glitches, and a few won't run at all. Some require the use of special keys that aren't present on a standard PC keyboard, and the controller options are limited at this time. Otherwise, the core has come a long way and is quite usable in its present form, so why not try it out for yourself? I hope you enjoyed this bit, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.